Hello, hello. My name is Deanna Moore, and welcome to Leaving Jehovah's Witnesses Deleted Scenes. This is the bonus edition. when I told my life story, I'll leave a link in the comments if you haven't seen that one. I condensed 38 years into 1 hour. And obviously, there were so many details that I left out. And so, thus, I'm doing the bonus edition here with some of the deleted scenes that didn't get included in the first one. The reason why I'm doing this is because I know that my story was fairly extreme. Not everybody had that level of insanity in their JW exodus. But I know that this collection of stories, you will find something to resonate with here because there is abuse of power, there is hatred of women, intense hatred of women, extreme homophobia, racism, and the pain and loss of life that comes with shunning. And the reason why I want to share all of these details too is because I hear so many of us saying, but I should have known better. I should have woken up. I should have known. How come I didn't see it earlier? Beating ourselves up because we didn't get out sooner. And so I'm hoping that by sharing all of these little stories that you'll be able to resonate with them and appreciate at a different level that we were truly, truly brainwashed. You know, they say if you throw a frog into a boiling pot of water, it will jump right out. But if you put a frog into water and you slowly heat the water to boiling, it will never notice that it's boiling alive. That is really gruesome, and I have never actually proved that story. But I think that's very symbolic. It's a good illustration of what all of us went through. We were slowly being boiled alive. And at some point, if you're watching this, obviously it's because you realized you were in hot water and you got out. But I hope to validate all of your experiences with mine because even if your stories weren't horrifically traumatic, the little details mattered. They affected our self-esteem. Jehovah's Witnesses too, suffer from some of the worst people pleasing, paranoia of what other people think, issues with intimacy, issues with carrying your burdens alone, hiding, not knowing how to be sincere or how to be a real human being. And this is a collection of stories that I bet all of you will be able to resonate with because it wasn't just the huge traumatic events that I went through. I was actually surprised because I started writing down some of the events and some of the stories that I wanted to share. And I was surprised at how many there were. I didn't know where to stop. So take courage. All of your experiences are valid, and you are not alone. You're not alone. I also want you to know that there is healing on the other side. The past does not define us. These were events that we went through, and there is recovery. We can learn to heal and thrive on the outside. I don't care how bad it was. Okay, so let's start with how about my skirt story? I think this is a perfect example of why so many of us are so ultra concerned with what people think and their opinions of us. I remember I was probably about 15 or something like that, and it was one of the worst winters that I ever remember to this day. It was snowing like 3 feet at a time, and it was, minus 30. It was ridiculously cold. And we had taken to wearing jeans underneath our skirts because it was so cold. And This is back in like the early 90s, and clothing was not super modest. So I had learned to sew so that I could have modest clothes to go out in service with. And as you can imagine, wearing jeans underneath my skirt and, like 5 layers of t-shirts under turtlenecks, under with tank tops, kind of made my clothes look a little bit tight. So, of course, somebody complains that they're offended that my clothes are too tight. Yeah, well, if somebody thinks jeans underneath the skirt is sexy, they've got a major problem, and she did. And her being offended then became my problem. I remember my dad made me stand up on a bench and model my entire wardrobe, bending sideways, touching my toes to make sure that my wardrobe was appropriate. I remember being so furious that I had this one skirt pattern, the skirt in question. I just ripped them all up. I went into like this fury and just destroyed and trashed like half of my wardrobe. All because somebody was offended. Someone didn't approve. And if you think that stories like that don't impact our self esteem, they absolutely 100% do. In fact, I remember even out of the cult, I remember when I first met my current husband, he's never been a JW. I would say things like, oh, what, is this blouse too tight, or is this too low, or is this. Finally, one day he looks at me, he's like, what the heck is wrong with you? You're a grown woman, wear whatever you want. And at that moment, I realized how much this skirt incident had impacted my self esteem, my opinion of what I wore, and my over concern with what people thought. That is something that we all need to work on deprogramming, because in the real world, nobody cares what you wear. Nobody cares what your hair looks like, or how many piercings you have, or your choice of clothes. And if they do, it's none of their business, and it's none of yours to conform to what everyone in the world thinks that you should do. I started off with that story because that's probably one of the younger stories of, as I was the younger. But, stories didn't get better from there. I remember probably about the same time frame. There was a celibate brother in the congregation, and he was celibate because he was gay. We had a get together, and I remember everybody talking about what it would be like to be perfect and perfection in the new system, and oh my gosh, we're all gonna be perfect. And I was sitting next to him, and I remember him kind of whispering under his breath, and he says, I won't even recognize myself. He kind of chuckles and he goes, I don't even know who I'll be. And I remember feeling so crushed for him. I remember having such an empathy for, God, what must that feel like? To feel like there is something so wrong with you that when you're healed, you won't even know yourself. I remember my parents studied with a lesbian couple that were raising a little boy together. And, they didn't make it very far. They didn't make it very far in the study. They would come over to our house and sit at the kitchen table, and they would hold hands. And they started going to meetings, and they would cry. And I remember thinking, how could we be doing this to them? How could Jehovah judge them for just being human? And yet we did that. We did that. In my life story, I talked about my first marriage and how my sister-in-laws took me out after the wedding and said, there's some things about our family that you should know. And they went on to recount horrific abuse that had gone on in the family. And I skipped out on a lot of the details of what I went through. So here's some of the details. My father-in-law truly was crazy. We called him eccentric. He was just eccentric, which is code for let's overlook it, right? When we got back from Bethel in Mexico, I had to live there for a little while, and my father-in-law didn't allow locks on the doors, including the bathrooms. And he would literally come in the bathroom frequently while I was taking a shower and go to the bathroom. Take leak while I'm taking a shower, and he'd giggle. Like it was the funniest joke in the world. I can never erase from my mind the fear, the the disgust that I felt at that lack of respect, the degrading feeling. He'd come in the bedroom in the middle of the night to just look through his closet, like 1 o'clock in the morning, giggling like it was the funniest thing in the world. Once he was sitting in the living room with his son, my husband at the time. And of all the stories that I have, I don't think I have one that is explicitly clear with the hatred of women as the conversation between my father-in-law and my husband. My father-in-law sits there with this look of disgust on his face. I'm sitting right there in the living room. And he just starts saying about how stupid women are and how they're good for nothing but cleaning house and screwing. Only he said it in the most vulgar, disgusting terms I had ever heard at that point. I remember thinking that, maybe my husband was going to defend me or something. And he didn't. He just laughed like it was the funniest, most obvious observation that a person could make. It's no secret that the lack of respect for women in the organization is off the chain, and it is real. So there is no wonder why women suffer so much with appreciation for their femininity, appreciation for their own intelligence, for their own strength, because this was commonplace. A lot of my stories here that I'll continue telling have a lot to do with shut up, woman, know your place. When I'm clearly pointing out something that should be obvious to anyone with a heart. From there, after those experiences with my father-in-law, I had decided I'm going back to the Midwest. My family had left New York, and so I was going to go back to the Midwest. And the first husband decided to go with me. From there, it really got off the chain. He was the most sadistic human I have ever known, and to this day. I truly believe that very few people are evil. I think there's good people and I think there's bad people. I think there's people that take advantage of people, but I think there are truly very few evil people. And I was married to one. I was absolutely 100% married to one. He took so much pride in manipulating people. We would go to the meetings and he would bash some of the brothers. I remember there was this one particular elder, very shy, not a good public speaker, not the popular guy. He was totally a wallflower kind of guy, sweet guy, but just not talented at public speaking. And I remember before the meeting, my ex was talking about what a schmuck he was and, what a pogue and what an idiot. And he looks me in the eye and he says, watch that man eat out of my hands. And the brother had a part that night. And after the part, the ex goes up and he's like, oh my God, Paul, that was so amazing. You did such a good job. I really enjoyed your talk. And that brother just lights up. He just lights up. He says, thank you so much. And my ex just looks at me. He knew what he was doing. He was so hateful and manipulative. Another time we were on our way to my parents' house for dinner. And on the way there, he starts talking about how stupid my mother was. And he starts using the cruelest, most vulgar language that she's a B this and a C this, and she's so stupid and you're just like her. And then he says again, watch her eat out of my hands. Watch me wrap her around my finger, he says. We get to my parents' house and he goes up to her and he goes, "Mom, oh, Mom." And he gives her a big hug and she goes, "Oh, sweetie, I made your favorite dessert." And he just looks over at me and smirks. And I burst into tears. And my family goes, "Hey, what's wrong with her?" And he goes, "I mean, she's on her period." He was so sadistic. He was so sadistic. The mental torture was unlike anything I had ever gone through before. On our second anniversary, we were going to go out to, we went out to dinner. And at the time, I had horrific asthma, all stress induced, because after I left, the asthma completely disappeared. And the truth is, I didn't have asthma before this marriage. We show up at this restaurant, and this is back in the day when you could smoke in restaurants. And the waitress says, there's nothing available in the non-smoking section. You'll have to wait. We only have some tables in the smoking. And I go, "Oh yeah, that's okay. We'll wait because I have asthma." And he goes, "We'll take the smoking section." So we sit in the smoking section, and of course I start to get an asthma attack. And the waitress comes up and she's like, "Are you okay? Are you okay? Do we need to call an ambulance?" And he looks at her and he says, "Leave her alone. She's fine." Of course, I wasn't. So they did have to call an ambulance. And he finished his steak dinner while I got carried off in an ambulance. I thought I was alone during these incidents. I didn't realize until now, actually, how many other women there are out there that are suffering with extreme mental abuse, emotional abuse, to an insanity. To Nobody believed me. I tried to tell my dad, I tried to tell my family, but he put on such a good front that absolutely no one believed me. I didn't put this one together till afterwards. You know what? I think he was trying to set me up too, because he had a Bible study with an elder's son who had never been baptized, faded, and then, was trying to come back. We were about the same age. And he would have the Bible study come over to study or for dinner or to hang out or something like that. And he would leave. He would leave me alone with this guy, with this Bible study. One night we were sitting there and he had gone to the top. My ex had gone to the store. He says, "I'll be right back." And then he's taking a really long time. And the Bible study, actually being an elder's son, he wasn't totally ignorant to how things are supposed to work and everything. And he looks at me really awkwardly and he's like, sorry, that was my cat. He says, "This is a little awkward, don't you think?" I'm like, "Yeah, just a little bit. This is kind of weird." You know what? That must have happened a dozen or more times. I didn't really I didn't really put pieces together back then. Another time he had invited a young ministerial servant to go skiing with us. So the three of us were going to go skiing, and the brother shows up. It's like 6 o'clock in the morning. We load all the skis, we get everything all ready. All of a sudden, he says, "I'm not going to go. You two go." And we kind of look at each other and we're like, this is a little weird. Are you sure?" The brother's like, "Are you sure?" He's like, "Oh yeah, it'll be fine. There'll be other people there. Just go." You know what? I didn't even know to put those pieces together till like 10 years after I left him. I start going through all of these weird scenarios and I'm like, Gosh, I was so naive. How did I not see that? I was born into a cult. I was born into a cult. That's how. You're so easily deceived when you don't know what you're supposed to be looking for, you know? So then I will tell you because I want you to normalize if you've been through anything like that. Those events made me insane. I mean, I literally all I could think about was murder, you know? Nobody believed me. I wasn't questioning the religion or anything. I just knew that I was in this most horrific marriage and nobody believed me. I wished he'd have beaten me. If then I would have had bruises, but the emotional and the mental abuse, there's no there's no proof. There's no proof. And in the religion, you're not allowed to get a divorce because of any of these scenes that I'm describing. You just have to be more faithful. And that, my friends, is seriously screwed up. That is seriously screwed up. It's wrong. So then, we pass on to the second marriage with the worldly dad. And of course, I was going through, the domestic violence because he was an unbelieving mate. And, there was no love there. There was no empathy. It was all, well, you reap what you sow. I guess you get it. You deserve it. Reap what you sow. One time I came home after a meeting and he was drinking and he ended up throwing me into the dresser and I had some pretty serious pain for weeks and weeks after that. Finally, I ended up going to the chiropractor to see if maybe I had a rib out of place or something. And the chiropractor takes x-rays and he says, "So, how did you crack your ribs?" And I burst into tears. I burst into tears because I didn't know I had cracked ribs. I went to the police station to get some advice for a friend, and he was active duty military at the time. And they explained that my friend should report it, and most likely he would also have consequences in the military. Most likely having his paycheck taken away to zero for 30 to 90 days. And that system failed too, because I knew that we would not be able to survive without a paycheck. And I knew how much that would infuriate him even more. So I endured that. I endured that. Actually, you know what? It was a relief when he left. And then when I had the opportunity to get my spiritual life back by marrying somebody that was 20 years older and an elder, I was excited to get my spirituality, my spiritual life back, to get spiritual stability for my kids. Why the hell didn't I wake up yet? Because I was brainwashed. Hello, I grew up in a cult. Hello, trust in Jehovah. Trust in Jehovah. Jehovah's perfect. We don't understand perfect justice. There's imperfection in the religion, but you stay faithful. We were brainwashed people. That's why we didn't wake up. Hello. Frogs in a boiling pot, man. The water just keeps getting hotter and hotter. Just keeps getting hotter and hotter. With the third marriage, I'm going to touch on this one too. This is a more intimate detail, but I think we need to say it out loud too, because the issues that ex-Jehovah's Witnesses have after coming out of the religion with regards to intimacy. Hello, here's another reason. I remember probably not 2 weeks after we were married, I tried to initiate intimacy. And immediately he says, "Stop it. You don't start anything. I decide when and if anything happens." And by the way, he says, "I will never buy you flowers. I will never celebrate an anniversary, and I will never take you out on a date." And I go, "Why?" And he says, because I did it to my first wife and it did no good, it was a waste of time, and I will never do that again. Is it any wonder that we have issues with intimacy, our self-esteem coming out? I don't think so. So, I had gone through my own being disfellowshipped and being reinstated. And so by the time I'm in this third marriage as an elder's wife, you know, there were some more, here's my disfellowshipping stories of people that I knew that were shunned. One was my stepson. In the third marriage, I had two stepsons, and one of them was disfellowshipped. And he wanted to start coming back to meetings. So his dad had been a barber for 20 years. He had cut his son's hair his entire life. So my stepson comes to his dad and he says, Dad, I can't afford to get a haircut. Can you just cut my hair so that I look decent going to the meetings? And his dad says, yes, but we're going to have to do it outside on the patio. You cannot come inside because you're just fellowshipped. And the boy says, okay. Lo and behold, the service group comes to use the bathroom. And we're busted for associating with a disfellowshipped person. And my third husband got in trouble for cutting his boy's hair. Not publicly reproved or even privately reproved or anything, but they canceled his parts on the meeting for like 6 months. And the reproach, I remember two elders came to talk to him about the sin of associating with the worldly, the dangers of associating with the worldly person. And he defended it. He's like, I've been a barber for 20 years. I've always cut the boys' hair. It was outside. Where's the reasonableness? Coming from him, that was hilarious because, he actually wasn't very reasonable himself, but that was an instance of reasonableness. That boy felt so bad. My stepson felt so bad because, he knew his dad got in trouble for that. And, thank God for the loving arrangement of softening those rules now because, right? I remember once there was a sister. She'd been coming back to meetings for 2 years. She was pregnant. She had the baby. She had this little newborn. I don't know, maybe it was like 6 or 7 months old, and she still was not reinstated. And I'd been in her shoes. I knew what that was like to go to the meetings while you're pregnant and then have a baby and to be completely shunned the whole time. And so I see her get up during the meeting and run to the bathroom, and I knew she was crying. So I run back in the bathroom, and she's sitting on the couch. Women's bathrooms have couches, by the way. So I go and I sit next to her, and I just threw my arms around her because I knew the pain that she was feeling. And she just hugged me, and she sobbed, and I started crying. And I didn't say a word because that would have really been the nail in my coffin, right? I was just there for moral support. And I got in trouble for that. And she got reinstated not long after that, and we became really good friends because I didn't really know her before she was disfellowshipped. And she told me, she says, I think you saved my life that night because I just wanted to go home and end it. And she says, your hugging me helped me hang on. Shunning is so messed up. It was so messed up. And even then I knew it, which is why I hugged her. But I'm still obeying the rules, right? Because that's what we're supposed to do. About this time too, it was, there were three congregations in our Kingdom Hall, and this happened in the congregation that was not my congregation. So I didn't really know them personally, but I knew what the story was. The story was this 14-year-old girl got disfellowshipped, and her dad was an elder, and I don't remember if he stepped down or if he got removed, but the story was he had a bad attitude because his daughter got disfellowshipped. And so it's all like, ooh, it's so scandalous. It's so scandalous. Ooh, you need to follow Jehovah's arrangement, even if you don't agree with it. And that was probably about 15 years ago. And now that I am out, I know the real story. The real story is that 14-year-old got raped. And the boy that did it recorded it. And the elders made her watch the recording for hours, saying, oh, this looks consensual, or oh, this looks like you're enjoying it. And they ended up suing the congregation, and it went all the way to the Utah Supreme Court, and they won. Here I was all those years ago, sitting there thinking that it's just a bad attitude, that they need to follow Jehovah's arrangement, with no idea the misery and the pain that family was going through because of the shunning. I had gone through a committee where you have to sit in front of these freaking freaks of nature elders and tell them all the gory details about your personal life. What the heck, man? Why didn't I get out? Because I was brainwashed. I was in a cult. That was the only life I knew. I didn't know there was any other option. I didn't know there was any other way to be. I'd been told since infancy that this is a loving arrangement to protect the congregation and to move sinners to repentance for their everlasting life. We did not have the ability to reasoning. We had no critical thinking skills. So don't stop. Don't beat yourself up for not waking up. You couldn't. You were in a cult just like I was. So from there, I think the story, some of the details get into a little bit more of the insanity of the religion when it comes to some of the rules and the racism. The racism, man. We went to the Dominican Republic and we were in the Haitian Creole congregation in the Dominican Republic. And this is where a lot more of the insanity starts, with how stupid the rules are in the religion. You have to be married in order to progress. In order to become a publisher, you need to either be separated from your illegitimate union or you need to be legally married. Well, this is a problem for illegal Haitians because in that particular area, a lot of the Haitians didn't have birth certificates. A lot of them weren't even exactly sure when their birth date was, or maybe even who the dad was. So to require these people to go back to Haiti to figure out how to get a birth certificate, both of them usually, the man and the woman, so that they could legalize their union so that they could progress, was not possible. Not economically, not logistically. It wasn't going to happen. I will never forget a family that I studied with. They had been together, I think, 18 years. They had 5 little kids, and they would walk an hour to the meetings with their cute little kids in their little suits and ties and their little dresses, and all underlined for the watchtower. And the little kids would raise their hand and comment. And the woman would go back into the bathroom and cry because she couldn't be a publisher, because they had no birth certificates. They couldn't get married. And so what was the solution? Break up the family, man. He needs to go live somewhere else. The heartlessness of that broke my heart. Broke my heart. There was another couple that were in their 70s. They'd been together like 60 years, like ridiculous, like their whole lifetime. In their 70s. They didn't have birth certificates. You need to get separated. That made no logical sense to me whatsoever. Yeah, and I got in trouble for that too because I mouthed off to the circuit overseer. We were in Bethel one time doing a tour, and the service department there I start bringing up all these stories, and of course, what do I get? Well, talk to your husband. Your husband needs to be the one that says anything. And then to him, he got, you need to keep your you need to keep your woman in line. She's stepping out of line. To me, I was fighting for human rights. I argued that a piece of paper or a birth certificate didn't matter to God, that Jehovah didn't care whether you had a birth certificate or not, that how could we not make exceptions for these people that just wanted to serve Jehovah? And yet here we are. Here we are. The heartlessness, the lack of human kindness, the lack of love. I had never experienced that in my entire life. I remember one time I was driving down the road and there was a young Haitian man. I didn't know him, but he was crying on the side of the road. And so I pull over and I say, "What's wrong? What's wrong, sweetheart? What's wrong?" And he looks at me and he shows me his hands. And his hands were the most calloused boot leather hands I had ever seen in my life. And he says, "I work hard. I work hard. And my wife is dying. And I don't have the money to save her." And I said, "Well, what's wrong?" And she was in labor and she was bleeding heavily. She needed a C-section and he didn't have the money for it. So I said, "Get in the car." And I took him to the hospital and I paid for it. It cost $40 for a C-section. $40 saved the woman and the baby's life. And they were both so grateful. They let me name the baby. I got into so much trouble for that. I get called back in the back room about how I am making rice Christians and how everybody's going to start coming to the meetings thinking that we're all going to be paying for stuff and they're just getting handouts. And I remember just looking at them and saying, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? Of course, they immediately threatened to remove my privileges of being a pioneer for having a rebellious attitude. And I just looked at them and I said, I'm sorry, I can't find it in my heart to let somebody die over $40. I can't do it. And they said, "Well, you're going to have to, because that's not how you need to follow the arrangement." The insanity of that heartlessness, I could not wrap my heart around. So that's some of my rebelliousness in the Dominican Republic in the Haitian congregation. And so now comes to the part where one of the elders, Alex was his name, sees my bruises and says that I need to report what's going on domestically. And so I do. And my husband gets deleted as an elder, publicly reproved. He abandons us, clears out the bank account, and leaves me and the kids in the DR. And I'm sure you can imagine how traumatizing this was for my kids. He'd been their stepdad for 10 years, the only dad they knew. 2 weeks after the ex left, 2 elders come knocking at the door, wanting to talk to my 13-year-old. She had posted a picture on Facebook hugging a boy. And they were going to remove her as a publisher for that. And I said, "Please don't do that. Please have some empathy for this 13-year-old that just lost her stepfather. Please have some empathy for me. Can we show some kindness here?" But no, I'm sure this is probably my punishment for being such a Jezebel and speaking out, not knowing my place. And they removed my daughter as being a publisher for a picture on Facebook. That weekend we had an assembly, and there was a missionary couple there that I considered to be like parents to me. We had been really close, and my daughter had just been removed as a publisher, and she was she was devastated. She spent the whole time crying at the convention and thinking she didn't fit in, and she was she was really having a hard time. And the missionary couple, they were like, "Oh, what's wrong?" And I go, my husband just left us and he got publicly reproved, and fast as lightning, the brother says, that's gossip. You cannot say anything because it's slander. And you are on the line if you don't stay quiet. So here I am, surrounded by my international brotherhood, with not a soul in the world to talk to. I had to carry those burdens all by myself. This brother, Alex, actually, he's probably gay too, but he, when we had to leave back to the States, there had been a couple with two little kids who had been need graders in our congregation for about 3 months, and they were in the same congregation in California where this brother was. And so that's where we went. The family says, you could stay in the camper in our backyard until you get on your feet. I'm sure you can imagine the trauma that my kids were going through. They lose their stepdad, their sister, my daughter isn't a publisher anymore. We're like in total chaos. My kids had never been in an English congregation before, so here we are, we're trying to like hang in there, right? And we get to the congregation and there's Uncle Alex. This is the brother that my kids preached with 90 hours a month for 4 years. He represented something known, something stable. Good old funny Uncle Alex. And so the kids would sit with him at the meetings, and he was the one that was like, come on guys, let's go out in service. And even my daughter, even though she was not a publisher, he stuck her in the back seat of the car and says, you get to come with us, you just can't go to the doors. And of course I get called back into the back room. What, am I having an affair? What is this romantic relationship that I have going on? The religion is so messed up. They cannot understand anything that's not adultery. They couldn't understand that perhaps this was stability and a friend and a lifeline that my kids needed. They didn't give a crap. They didn't give a crap. We were forbidden to go out in service with him. The one person that my kids looked up to, so messed up. Again, my punishment for being mouthy and not knowing my place as a woman. So you'd think at this point I was probably starting to wake up, right? No, I'm still trying to do things right. I'm still trying to do things right. And if you watched my story, you know where it goes from here. My kids get kidnapped. I start doing this cross-country battle, back and forth. My ex, the third ex, the kid's stepdad, was in our home congregation, and he had told everyone I was an apostate. So when I showed up for custody hearings, I go to my home congregation, and of course I get the apostate treatment. I totally get the apostate treatment. I was cross country. I was all over the place. I was in Florida where the kid's dad was, where the kids had been kidnapped. I was going back and forth to Colorado. I don't even know where my publisher record cards were. And, here I am. I'm all discombobulated. I don't have my kids. My home congregation thinks I'm an apostate. I have zero support whatsoever. And in the Florida congregation, they didn't have my publisher record cards yet, but I was talking to an elder and telling him my background and my story, and he just says, we're doing unassigned territory. Come with us. It'll be encouraging. It'll be encouraging for you. So I did. I spent a week in South Carolina doing unassigned territory, and It felt so encouraging. It felt like the boost that I needed, that Jehovah was actually looking out for me. And when I get home, I have the two elders knocking on my door. And what are you doing? You didn't have permission for that. We've been in contact with your husband and you're an apostate. You have no privileges. You can do nothing. You're an apostate. Now, mind you, I never had any sort of committee meetings. There's no proof. It's literally just the word of my deranged husband that ruins my reputation completely. Throwing that word apostate out there is like throwing the word, racism. You call somebody a racist and everybody immediately is like, ooh, ooh. You don't need any proof. It's the one nail in your coffin, right? And so after that, that's when I gave up. That's when I quit. That's when I figured that, there must be something wrong with me. I didn't realize how long this was going to be. When I started writing down some of the bonus details that I wanted to share, I didn't realize how many of them there were. There was obviously the big tragedies, but there were so many blows along the way. So if you've watched here to the end, you know what you've been through. And you know what? If you're struggling in your recovery, hello, yeah, you think? You think? You're not crazy. You were in a cult. You were in a cult. So was I. It took me 38 years to realize, to wake up. Be patient with yourself, be kind. Maybe even journal and write down all of your little details, because the little details add up to a lifetime of abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, spiritual abuse. Spiritual abuse. But here I am 11 years later. I am happy, I am free, I am thriving, and I have a wonderful life. And so in my next video, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the recovery process. How I went from I lost everything and giving up to here and now. Okay. So thank you for watching. Please, please, please leave your comments, because sharing our stories makes a difference. And I would actually like to do some interviews with you so that you can share your voice, so that your story can be heard. Please reach out. Let's see, here's my email. Here's my email. If you would like to share your story, I will give you the platform to do that. So send me an email, and I will talk to you soon. Mwah. I love you all, and I'll talk to you soon.